Hey guys, welcome to part 3 of the American Revolution lecture. So, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about what the revolution does culturally and socially in America, because there's a shift that happens that's bigger than the battles, bigger than the individual pieces, that's going to affect how people think and how the culture works, kind of on down the line. So, one of the groups that we need to talk about are the groups that weren't interested in separating from Great Britain. So you can see there are significant numbers of loyalists left in the United States at the end of the Revolution. Most of them end up in Canada, but there are other groups, some of whom aren't able to kind of escape from colonization that easily. In particular, Native American tribes who were allies of the British during the Revolutionary War face a lot of negative repercussions when the war ends. In many cases, colonists were very violent in their treatment of them, even more so because they had supported the British. And the same thing is true for African Americans. So one of the things that we see in this period is that many African Americans, especially those in the Deep South, had participated on the side of the British. Very famously, Lord Dunmore issued a proclamation that all slaves that escaped from their colonial masters and joined his regiment would gain freedom at the end of the war. And about 3,000 of those African Americans did sail north into Canada at the end of the war. But something that we see here is that the war has ongoing effects. There are a number of minority groups that are involved in the war on the colonial side, and I want to spend some time talking to you about them because theirs is a story that often sort of gets left out. So what you see right now is a petition, and this was actually made during the war by a group of African Americans who were requesting the Second Continental Congress to free them. One of the problems with the revolution is that for many people, many especially minority groups, they took the message of the revolution about freedom very literally. African American slaves during the Revolution and after the Revolution argued that freedom included them, that freedom meant freedom from slavery. Our founders don't really see it that way, but this is something that we do see being given voice in this period. This idea that freedom should apply to everyone, that enslaving African Americans was very much on par with what the British had done and why we had rebelled in the first place. Throughout the Revolution and after the Revolution, we see an increased fear of slave uprisings, which is something we'll discuss again later in the semester. But particularly in the South, people are reluctant to arm African Americans, whether free or slave, because they fear that they may have internalized the language of the Revolution and might attempt to rebel themselves. So this is something to think about as we talk about this. Now, for the most part, most colonial leaders did initially refuse to accept African American soldiers, including free African Americans, which had a significant population in the North. But as the war goes on, it becomes clear, especially to many of the Northern commanders, that they needed bodies, they needed men, they needed soldiers, and it didn't particularly matter to them what racial group they were from. This painting is from 1975, it's done well after the Revolution, but this is a painting of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, which was made up of about 250 former slaves and free African Americans. Massachusetts also had an all-African American military unit, and in Massachusetts they were actually led by an African American officer. So There are not a lot, but there are a few designated units, especially from more northern colonies that had all African American units. Often, what they would do is they would offer freedom to anyone who would fight. So, of course, for many African Americans, this is a really kind of great out, a really good way of getting away from slavery. In some states, they would accept slaves in order to serve, but they had to have permission from their slave masters. And in many of the southern states, people would actually send a slave on their behalf to fight in the war instead of going themselves. So when we look at this, there's kind of a lot of different things happening, but there are African American soldiers in the Revolutionary War and in every war we fought since, and many of them do provide excellent service. We have a number of very heroic accounts of African Americans during the Revolution that were very, very brave and did excellent things. By far the more common place for African Americans to participate in the war was through spying. So this is something that we have to sort of think about. You might be wondering, well, why would an African American make a good spy? And the answer is that the racial stereotypes that are present in this time, and that you can certainly argue continue to be present in the modern world, was that African Americans weren't intelligent. Many military commanders of this time period didn't think they were smart enough to understand military strategy. And it was very common for African Americans to be used as servants or slaves in military encampments. So what would happen is many African Americans who worked as servants would pass on information. They would be serving dinner to a general. The general would say, "Oh, we're going to go to this town this week, and then we'll go here, and this is where we're going to attack, and when we're going to attack, and what's going to happen." And then they would leave camp and report that to the colonists, or to the British, as the case might be. Both sides did use African Americans as spies. What you see here, there are two spies that we have pretty good records on. So one is James Armistead, and he actually posed as an escaped slave wanting to join Lord Dunmore's regiment. But of course he was passing on information to the Americans. He was also a particularly excellent spy in that he told the British that he would spy on the Americans, but then he gave the British all bad information. So he worked as a double spy in a way, but very much on the American side, didn't really actually give much information to the British that was helpful to them. One of the interesting things about Armistead, one of the reasons we know so much about him, is that after the war he petitioned for his freedom. He was a slave when he was spying. So he petitioned the state of Virginia for his freedom, and they initially denied him. They initially said, "No, you don't deserve the freedom." And it was actually General Lafayette, one of the great French allies that we had, that then went to the French legislature and said, "No, but really, he deserves to be free," and he did gain his freedom after the Revolution. One of the other famous individuals that is very helpful for the Americans is Lemuel Haynes. Haynes was a very well-known preacher, and so he had a reason to travel around, a reason to meet with people, and was able to pass on a lot of information about the British as well. So we do see throughout the war African Americans on both sides, but because of Lord Dunmore's sort of proclamation that slaves would be freed if they served with the British, many slaves in the South did run away. We see an increased number of runaway slaves during this period that leave and go fight for the British, and eventually go into Canada with the British. So this is something to think about. Just like Native Americans, whoever's going to promise you the best deal is going to get your attention. Now, we also have women engaged in activity throughout the Revolution. And in many cases, these are sort of more close to home activities. Women provided food and supplies for soldiers. They provided uniforms. Women also served as nurses within the military. But we have a number of other sort of more violent accounts. We have numerous records of women who shot at or attempted to defend their homes from British soldiers who were coming to take supplies. We also have numerous accounts of women who, when they were told they found out the British were on their way, they would go out and burn all the crops so that the British would have no food. So we see lots of these kinds of activities. We also have some accounts of women who did go to battle, follow their husbands into battle, who participated quite regularly in battlefield experiences, firing cannons, firing guns, helping with supplies. So women are present both at home and on the battlefield. Like African Americans, women were often seen as good spies. This is an image from 1782 of a woman spy. And again, it's because the elite males of the time didn't think women were smart enough to understand military strategy. They didn't think that women were intelligent enough to actually act as spies, and just like African Americans, many women did act very successfully as spies. Many women would pose as servants or as prostitutes in some cases, and get information and then feed it back into colonial hands. Now, I want to end this by telling you guys a story, and this is a story, this will be our extra credit question on the midterm if you've been waiting for that with bated breath. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story. So, according to legend, Molly Pitcher was a young wife at the start of the Revolution, and her husband decided to go away to fight. And Molly Pitcher was so devastated, she couldn't bear the thought of being separated from her new husband. And so she decided to accompany him. She decided to go with him, which was a little bit unusual of a decision at the time. She and her husband participated in the Battle of Monmouth. And at the Battle of Monmouth, her husband was shot down while he was helping to load a cannon. Young Molly Pitcher supposedly grabbed up the cannonball, stuffed it into the cannon, fired it at the British, and continued to do so until the battle was over and the Americans had won. In some legends, she met up with George Washington, and he gave her a gold coin to mark her heroism. In other stories, she meets up with George Washington, and he actually makes her an officer in the colonial army. In some stories, she is a German woman. In other stories, she is an Irish woman. And we really don't know much about her. The legends sort of differ. Now, the interesting thing, the reason I tell you this story about Molly Pitcher, is that the legend becomes very powerful. It's seen as a mark of how brave and heroic the colonists were, that this young woman took up arms and participated in this battle. One of the things that happens is that in the 1870s, so well after the Revolutionary War, in the 1870s, there's a woman who's named Mary Ludwig Hayes Macaulay. And she actually applied for a pension. She said, this Molly Pitcher story is true. It was me. It was me. I was at the Battle of Monmouth. I was doing that. And she's actually awarded a soldier's pension by the state of Pennsylvania. Now, the problem with this is the timeline. If we're talking about the 1870s, Molly Pitcher would have been over 100 years old. So obviously this story isn't true, but it's exciting enough, people like it enough for the state of Pennsylvania to give her a soldier's pension until her death. So this tells you something about the story we like to tell ourselves. We tell ourselves a story of great heroism, of a young, weak nation standing up to a big, strong bully and beating them. And that is the story, that's the lesson of the Molly Pitcher story, that anyone can stand up for themselves, that anyone can fight. And that is part of our sort of culture. That's part of the thing that we talk about to ourselves, that we talk to ourselves about and think about. So, oops, there we go. See, this is my favorite images of Molly Pitcher, painted well after she had died. But think about this story. Think about the story that this projects. What does this tell us about ourselves? And I think it tells us quite a bit about our society. So that is all for today. I will see you guys on Tuesday. I hope you enjoyed the video lecture, and remember, there will be